Hey everyone, today I wanted to go through, and some of you might be wondering this right now, what is better, to buy in an HOA community or to buy somewhere that does not have an HOA? So I prepared a little bit of an exercise to go through and compare and contrast which one is better for long-term wealth building or buying in an HOA community or buying outside of one. To illustrate that point, I put together a couple of properties just to look at briefly. One is a townhome with an HOA. As you can see, it's new construction for sale in Lafayette, Colorado. Nice. The price and the HOA amount are the only two things that we're looking at. So we can see here the HOA amount is $79 per month and the price is $480. So I'm going to put those two things in here. And for those of you that don't know, this is a spreadsheet that I've used many times when pricing out not only how much things are going to cost in the immediate aftermath of buying a home, but also what things are going to be worth 30 years into the future when ideally the home is already paid off. So we'll put 480,000 in here. It should be enough zeros. And let's put HOA in at 79. So actually, since there are two houses that we're looking at, let me just create another sheet here. We'll call this one the non-HOA, and the other one we'll call it the HOA property. So this HOA property, $480,000, and the monthly HOA fee is $79. Let's assume we put 20% down. Great. And then let's also assume the interest rate is what it is today, which is 6.98% for a conventional loan, which is nuts. For monthly insurance, since this is a townhome, HOA usually covers sometimes they'll cover exterior on insurance. So that means that the person that buys the home only has to cover the interior of the house, which can be substantially cheaper. I remember 4 or 5 years ago I was looking to buy, and it was going to be like $20 or $30 a month for a townhome for covering the insurance. So let's call it 40 though, just to be fair, inflation and all. And annual taxes, townhomes are probably, well, let's just leave it at 3,000. Monthly utilities, let's call it, let's not do utilities. Repairs, improvements over the course of 30 years, even though the home is brand new right now, yeah, you're going to have repairs and improvements. Let's call it 100 of repairs and 100 of improvements, and we'll do the same on the non-HOA house when we get there. And then let's say rents-wise, let's say it rents out for $2,500 a month, which is substantial. So looking at the scorecard, the cost to own this home, the principal is going to be $326, interest $22.23, property taxes on a monthly basis $250, home insurance is $40, HOA is $79, and repairs and improvements, again, over the long term, but still looking at it here in the first year, going to start saving for that. Well, now I think about it, HOA is in charge of exterior of the structure, and that usually includes the roof, that usually includes the stucco or the siding, whatever it is. So really, we just have to cover the interior of the structure. So we're going to call it, let's just call it 50 for monthly repairs and 50 for improvements as well. Okay, so our monthly profit or loss in this case is $519 or $6,223 per year. Now let's jump over and I might add here that the reason that I chose these two structures is one is 480, and that is the HOA one, and the other is 500, let's call it. That's the non-HOA one. So the reason that I chose these two is because I was in a similar situation a few years ago where I could afford X amount of mortgage, they call it, principal, interest, taxes, insurance, and HOA. And that bought me, let's call it $400,000 worth of house, or about $380,000 worth of townhouse. And the reason for that was because the HOA fee, even though it was relatively small, it still eats into your monthly ability to pay your debt. So a lender's only going to give you a certain amount, and when HOA is included, that HOA has to be part of it. So that might mean that you can afford a $500,000 house without an HOA, or you can afford a $480,000 townhouse with an HOA. Does that make sense? Let me know in the comments if that doesn't, and I can clarify in future videos. So, hence the 480 versus the 500. Let's jump right over. Let's say that we got a great credit score too, even though, yeah. Jumping over now to the non-HOA house. There we go. No more confusion. We have, let's call it great credit score again, all things being equal. Conventional loan, sure. $2,500 of rent. A down payment, let's call it 20% again, just so that we are doing things equally with the HOA house. Interest rate, let's call it what it is over here, which is 6.98. 6.98. HOA fee. Now we don't have an HOA fee because it's not an HOA neighborhood. Monthly insurance. Now we are in charge of the interior and exterior of the structure. So let's call it $80 a month. And let me know if that's consistent with what you're experiencing. I know insurance rates have gone up drastically in some areas of the country in recent months and years. Annual taxes, let's leave that at $3,000. Monthly utilities, we're not going to address that at this point. Monthly repairs. Now we are in charge of the interior and exterior of the structure. So, assuming we do a half decent job of it and that it's currently in good repair, let's give us 100 there and 100 on monthly improvements. That brings us to a net loss of $580. Now again, the only three differences between our two scenarios are the price, the HOA, the insurance, and the repairs, which are all going to be cheaper with a townhome. And let's see what happens as we project this out towards the 30-year mark. So in 30 years, the non-HOA home, or probably single-family home in a non-HOA neighborhood, is going to have had a principal paydown of $384,000. Again, that's the house price. Oh, whoops, I forgot to put in here house price $500,000. My bad. Okay, there we go. House price, so principal paydown is house price minus down payment, which is $100,000. So principal paydown is $400,000. Price appreciation, so what the property appreciates over the next 30 years on average, is going to accumulate to $1.121 million. And that is based on an assumption here that annual real estate appreciation is 4%. And I just put that because real estate on average appreciates between 3 and 5% per year. 4% is in the middle. And then cash net cash in / out, $510,557. Again, that is based on whatever the profits are after the year is over. In this case, there isn't going to be any profit. In fact, you're going to be in the hole about $700 every month. So assuming that you want to cover $8,000 in deficits every year until the rents come up to, which they do, they will probably outpace your expenses. It's just a matter of when and how long you have the stomach to cover it. So we'll come over here and we see that net income for the property, here's our negative 8230. So it is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years until, or in the 9th year, that you'll break even on this property if you were to go for this one. And that year you would essentially rake in, if you can say that, $122. If you were to invest that $122 over the course of the next 21 years, that would be worth $905. If you were to invest next year's profit of $949 into the stock market for 20 years, because remember, you only have 20 years before the house is paid off, which is the time that we're measuring these things at, then that $949 will, at 10% interest, yield you $6,383 in 20 years. And on we go. And so adding up all of the profits, so what they will be worth invested in the stock market for the duration that they will be in there, you get this $510,557, which is $510,557. So that's where we're getting that. It's just a simple, what happened if you invested all your profits at 10% interest rate. And again, we can control that cash reinvestment rate here at 10%. So adding up all these things, we get that the house created net worth at the end of the 30 years is $2,032,000. And that in 30 years, the cash flow with a fully paid off house would be $48,698 per year. Assuming all these assumptions hold valid. Now I think it's worth going through the cost to own the HOA property one more time. Remember, we are now in the hole starting year 1, or year 0, excuse me, at $519, and then that is an annual $6,223 that you're having to cover out of pocket for year 0. Now, of course, that amount is going to decline throughout the years, so that we get to we get to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years until you're making a profit, and by then you're making $743 a month, or excuse me, per year, and that increases from there. And all of our invested profits add up to, over the course of the next, call it 23 years, add up to $624,000. Okay, so $624,000 comes in here. The price appreciation, assuming 4% price appreciation per year, this HOA property adds up to $1.076 million, and then principal pay down in addition, which is what your tenants pay down for you from the mortgage every month on a monthly basis. They'll pay down $326 per month, and again, that amount goes up every month by like $1 or $2, such that over here on this side you can see the amortization table. In month 1, the principal amount they pay down is $316. Month 2, $318. Month 3, $320, and on, so that the first year averages. Let's change this to average. Averages $326 of principal pay down per month, and again, that's reflected here. So by the end, this HOA property will have paid down, or the tenants of this property will have paid down $384,000, adding up each of these three elements, we get a house created net worth of 2.085 million. Now let's compare that. I'll just throw in a little formula here to this. And we get that the HOA property actually comes out, counterintuitively, comes out ahead by $53,000 by the end of the 30-year period. And the reason for that is, even though it starts out at a lower price, you'd think that whatever starts out at a higher price is going to outpace the other thing. Well, yes and no. This HOA property did have did start from behind by $20,000, but all these little savings, like the monthly insurance being $40 instead of $80, like the monthly repairs being $50 instead of $100, monthly improvements being $50 instead of $100, that little amount, even including the negative, which was HOA, which again the non-HOA property didn't have, surprise, surprise, all those little things add up to mean that the net gain or loss, in this case, of $519 per month was less than on the non-HOA property, which was $686 per month, and that in the long term made a $50,000 difference. Now here's some other things to consider. HOAs, are they good? What are they good for? Some of you might say absolutely nothing. They can be great because on the one hand, I'm sure you've heard the horror stories of they can tell you what you can and can't do around your house, on the exterior at least. They can tell you what kind of shingles you can and can't have on your roof. Of course, they might take care of it for you if you're in a townhome. They can tell you what kind of plants you can have in your yard. They can tell you how long your grass can be and how long it can't be. They can tell you what kind of car you can park in your driveway or out in front of your street. Can you have a boat parked out on the front of your street? Well, that's going to depend on the HOA. What kind of people are going to be able to live in your home? What kind of renters are you going to be able to have? You have to, in many cases, let your HOA know exactly who's going to be renting from you, and they can determine a lot of things about your life. Now, on the other hand, the benefits are their main purpose most of the time is to ensure that the property value stays elevated. Let me change to this so you can see me better, for better or worse. They make sure that the property values are able to appreciate at a rate that so that it's not that property values aren't going up slower in the HOA community than they are outside the HOA community. They make sure that your neighbor doesn't paint their house pink or whatever. On the flip side, let's look at the non-HOA house. You might have a possibility of, you buy it, you're excited, you fix it up, whatever, you rent it out, you're making, you're losing a little bit of money, but you've got your eyes set on making profits 8 years down the road. And then a couple of years in, your neighbor paints their house pink. Well, what does that do for your property value? Your tenant's not going to want to look at that every day. In fact, it might make them sick. Maybe your neighbor across the street decides, I don't care about my lawn. I'm just going to let it grow and see what happens. And pretty soon it's 3 inches, 6 inches, a foot, 3 feet tall. Pretty soon you have weed trees growing in their yard. And that's something that you have to look at, and your tenants have to look at every day. Think about what that's going to do to your property value. Let's say your neighbor on the other side decides to park their RV in front of their house. Your neighbor's not going to, or your tenant's not going to want to look at that. So all these little things add up to, a deterioration of your property value over time. Now, it might still be going up in value, but it's not going to be going up at that 4 or 5%. It might be going up 3% per year instead. Let's see, what other horror stories have I had happen? let's say that the house at the end of the street burns down, and the owners decide, we're just going to take the insurance money and not fix it up and try to sell the lot. In the meantime, guess what you have to drive by every day? And your tenants, they have to drive by an empty, burned down lot of a house. And then that gives, guess what kind of tenants are going to move in to houses that have to look at that stuff? Yeah, probably less stellar tenants, maybe tenants that move in 3 or 4 families instead of 1 or 2. Maybe tenants that park their cars and trucks on the grass instead of in the driveway or overhang or garage. So all these things will start adding up and might cause some serious gentrification in that neighborhood. Something that an HOA, for all its flaws, will make sure, or be darned, that doesn't happen in their neighborhood. So let's throw in some of these other scenarios. Let's go to the non-HOA house, and let's say over time, real estate, maybe over the next 30 years, that neighborhood starts to degrade. And worst case scenario, it only appreciates at 3% per year instead of 4%. Whoa. And let's say that annual rent increase now instead of 3.5% per year, which by the way historically it has been in my city. Let's say that that's only now 3%. Oh, you guys can't see my screen. Hold on. So I just changed this from 4% to 3%, and the annual rent increase from 3.5% to 3%. If everything else stays the same, your house created net worth is now only $1.45 million after 30 years. Meanwhile, if we recall, the HOA community house was at almost $2.1 million, and now it's a $636,000 difference between HOA and non-HOA. So you really have to be careful when picking the neighborhood. If you're going for a non-HOA house, you gotta be careful to pick the neighborhood. Make sure that it's got people looking after their houses. Make sure that it's people that, where there's a majority of homeowners, those neighborhoods will usually take care of their houses, and they'll usually care what their front lawn looks like. They'll usually care what their sidewalk looks like, and what their shrubbery and trees look like, and the exterior of their house. And they'll try to report people to the city that seem to be in violation of city codes, which usually keeps, at least in my experience, keeps neighbors accountable. Now, on the flip side, not everything's honky-dory with a HOA house, because guess what you have to do? Now you have, let's reset this non-HOA house to, let's actually keep it. Let's assume that it's in a degrading neighborhood. Now this HOA house, let's assume this is one of the horror stories that you hear about, where somewhere a water pipe breaks or a swimming pool pump goes out, and suddenly, or maybe it's a private road, and so there's suddenly road damage somehow, that, guess what, that gets assessed and spread out between every resident in the neighborhood. And so sometimes you hear about HOA assessments going up, so that instead of paying maybe $79 a month, now you're paying $400 a month. Let's see what that does. Yeah, so now we went down from 2.086, I think. Yep, 2.086 million down to $1.846 million. So down about $180,000 from HOA just being $79. So some of these variables are really outside of your control as a homeowner in an HOA neighborhood. I've heard of assessments going up to $600. Let's see what that would do. Oh, boom, there went another $113,000. Those things really eat into your A, profits, and B, it eats into what you can sell your house for, because guess what? Now someone that wants to buy your house in 30 years, guess what they have to pay? They have to pay, remember, principal, interest, taxes, insurance, HOA. When HOA is $600 instead of $79, guess what they can afford less of? Principal and interest. Guess what that means? The house value at which you can sell your house is significantly decreased. Not only that, but let's assume for a moment that the HOA fee stays at $79. Guess what? It's not going to stay there forever. In fact, I guarantee you that it wasn't at $79 for the last 10 years, probably not even for the last 2 years. Every so often they'll get reassessed. And so over here, we built in that, let's say that the HOA increases as inflation goes up. So this $948, that's $72 per month times 12. A year later, that's going to be 2% more expensive, because we're assuming that HOA is being nice and increasing only at the rate of inflation. So by the time year 30 comes around, or year 29, you're paying $1,600 a year, almost $1,700 a year, instead of just the $948, even though it's only increasing at 2% per year. So if you're considering living in an HOA neighborhood, you have to really consider A, what's the HOA like? You got to do your research on the management of the HOA. A lot of times they will farm out HOA management to a company that has a track record of either being a great HOA management company or not being such a great HOA management company, and your HOA president's just trying to save a lot of money. And then, you got to figure out, is the HOA fee that they're charging, is that going to be worth it? Sometimes they'll start out really low if it's a new build community and say, oh, it's only $25 a month. But there's a provision that within 4 years it's going to increase to $125 a month, right? Those are all going to have impacts on your profit if you're planning on renting out the house, or if you're even just planning on living there, what you're going to be spending every month. Those are going to be likely in the HOA bylaws. One of the other great things, though, about HOAs is that sometimes the HOA fee includes things other than just the cost to trim your, or to the cost of enforcing their enforcing the HOA's rules. Sometimes, there's a part of it is that for sure, and a part of it is the assessments for future repairs. You got to figure out how much is going to that. But sometimes they'll cut your grass, sometimes they'll trim your bushes, sometimes they'll, weed, sometimes they will shovel sidewalks or make sure that the streets are plowed. So sometimes garbage might be included, sometimes water might be included, some of these utilities. So those are also things that you want to price out. So long story short, you got to read the HOA bylaws to see, first of all, can you even rent in an HOA neighborhood? Because some neighborhoods do not let you rent, which is crazy, or they'll only let a certain percentage of residences be rented out at a certain time, and you have to be put on a waiting list. So if you want ultimate freedom to do what you want with your property, and neighbors can do whatever they want, then maybe a non-HOA house is going to be the one for you. If you really care about the resale value and you trust your research to be able to weed out a good or bad HOA, then maybe an HOA home is going to be what you're looking for. Anyway, those are my thoughts. But got to be careful, because whichever you pick can have a tremendous impact on your net worth within the next 30 years. That's all. Let me know if you have questions, or have you had horror stories with HOAs, or have you had good experiences with HOAs, and did I miss something? Let me know in the comments. I really look forward to hearing what you think. Anyway, take care.